Hey everyone, it's been over 2 minutes and I haven't been raped yet. Unless you count reading Luce Irigarei's thoughts about feminism and science. Hi, I'm Diana Davison. Over the last few weeks I've been investigating the mystical drift that is deeply embedded into feminism. And one of the things I tried to do with my last video, I created a scale of squirrel. And the intent was to help people separate out mystical ideas from what appears to be secular. So I talked about a book called The Divine Feminine, which a feminist historian found connections, deep connections between the original, the suffragettes, the first wave feminists, and a thing called theosophy. Now, theosophy is a religion founded by Madame Blavatsky. And in this book, The Key to Theosophy, the first question she's asked is theosophy a religion? She says, it is not. Theosophy is divine knowledge or science. Right, so the attraction of theosophy to feminists was, first of all, it was a religion founded by a woman. One of the principles in theosophy is that there's the divine masculine and the divine feminine, and that the human race is evolving. And part of that evolution will involve the rising up of the feminine, because it's a perceived patriarchy and a masculine predominance in society that has thrown off the progression of the human race. So they have to raise up the divine feminine in order to create a balance, which will then allow humanity to evolve into the next root race. And you can look up root races if you don't know what that is. So part of the appeal of theosophy to feminists, and a lot of the major feminists in the suffragette movement went into theosophy, and that is because there was basically a linking up of goals. Now, some of the feminists had secular goals, and in fact, Annie Besant, who became the president of the Theosophical Society after Madame Blavatsky's death, started out as an atheist. She'd been married to a minister and increasingly became against religion, and was basically granted a divorce because of irreconcilable differences, and she got deeply involved in the National Secular Society in England at the time. When she got engaged with theosophy, in part because of her feminist work, she ended up splitting from the NSS and made a very passionate speech about how much she cared about the National Secular Society, but that she had to leave because she had been given proof that theosophy had the truth, and she was in pursuit of the truth, the capital T truth. So I'm going to look at something written by Luce Irigaray, dealt with in a book by Alan Sokol and Jean Bricmont. It's called Fashionable Nonsense, Postmodern Intellectuals' Abuse of Science. Now, Irigaray was mocked by Richard Dawkins and by Sokol and his partner, specifically in this book that I'm going to be reading from, for saying things like E equals mc squared is a sexed equation because it privileges the speed of light over other speeds which are vitally necessary, and claiming that the reason fluid dynamics or mechanics hadn't been solved was because men don't understand fluids like women do because they menstruate, and that if women were involved in sciences, they probably would have discovered the equations to solve fluid mechanics. So that has already been discussed by other people who are much more knowledgeable in science. What I want to talk about is something that happens at the end of this chapter, chapter 5 in the book Fashionable Nonsense. Speaking of the female sexual economy from puberty through menopause, Irigaray writes, "But every stage in this development has its own temporality, which is possibly cyclic and linked to cosmic rhythms. If women have felt so terribly threatened by the accident at Chernobyl, that is probably because of the irreducible relation of their bodies to the universe." Here Irigaray falls straight into mysticism. Cosmic rhythms, relation to the universe. What on earth is she talking about? To reduce women to their sexuality, menstrual cycles, and rhythms, cosmic or not, is to attack everything the feminist movement has fought for during the last 3 decades. Now, it's understandable that Sokol would think that Irigaray's claims were defeating the goals of feminism if you actually weren't able to recognize the mystical elements, which he correctly identified in this passage. If you couldn't identify that mysticism that runs throughout feminist theory. So there has always been the concept that women have a spirituality to them different from men, and that women's engagement in public life will somehow bring some new quality to it. So this is mystical thinking, just not expressed so clearly and so dramatically, but it is underlying all of the feminist dogma. If feminism was purely a secular movement, it would have ended when they achieved their secular goals. And their arguments would be clearly secular without engaging in any of this spirituality talk, this essence of woman talk, and this concept that there's a balance to be achieved by rising up the feminine, and that the patriarchy hurts men too because it is toxic masculinity. So these are all mystical in nature, and one of the keys to preventing the corruption of our society by this mysticism is to be able to start detecting it, and to pull it apart from the secular clothing that it's wearing. Just as Theosophy claims it's not a religion, it's a science, and just as, I'll put a link below, you can find Occult Science, this clothing of ideas in the language of science is a trick that's hiding mysticism. From Stanford's Feminist Epistemology and Philosophy of Science. Feminist epistemology and philosophy of science studies the ways in which gender does and ought to influence our conceptions of knowledge, the knowing subject, and practices of inquiry and justification. It identifies ways in which dominant conceptions and practices of knowledge, attribution, acquisition, and justification systematically disadvantage women and other subordinated groups, and strives to reform these conceptions and practices so that they serve the interests of these groups. So, one of the questions that might come to mind is knowledge gendered? Are there things that women can know that men can't know? Is the universe gendered? Is there something that female scientists can find out about, the universe, life, and everything that male scientists can't because they are coming from a male perspective? So this leads me to, I'm going to finish up with a comment on the situation on YouTube that's taken place between Thunderfoot and the feminist community. Now, Thunderfoot, for anyone who doesn't yet know, is a scientist and an atheist who started making videos, anti-feminist videos. And as a result, the feminist community has declared him to be some sort of a Nazi or a Hitler or something like that, and have tried to get him fired. And he asked a question in one of his videos recently, which is whether or not these feminists had considered that he's a scientist extremely good at what he does, and if they get him fired, then the scientific community will have lost an incredibly good researcher. And I don't know if it occurred to him that that would be a good thing to a feminist, because they think that there are too many male scientists and that you are practicing, Thunderfoot, not just science, you are practicing male science. And they would much rather see you replaced with a woman who, instead of doing the types of experiments you do, might find some, secrets about the female nature of the universe, which you're preventing them from doing because you've got funding. So it's not that feminists don't understand you're doing science, it's that they think you're doing the wrong kind of science. So no, they don't have a problem getting you fired. So with that, I'll leave you with the rape joke of the week. My girlfriend said I raped her last night, but we're both scientists and I was actually just testing out the theory of the Big Bang.